Throughout history, one of the most barbaric and brutal execution and torture dungeons was the oubliette. These were found inside medieval castles. For example, Corfe Castle in England had an oubliette, where dozens of knights were starved and slaughtered during the reign of King John. England's worst medieval king even executed a woman inside this specific dungeon. The point of the oubliette was for a prisoner to be thrown into a dungeon and simply forgotten, and they would never get out. Some oubliettes were so small that a prisoner could not stand or sit down, and they were just locked into one position, crouching over forever. They often had to deal with the remains of a prisoner who went before them, but the oubliette was also psychological torture. Even inside the most notorious English prison and fortress, the Tower of London, there was a torture dungeon like an oubliette found. This was known as Little Ease, and this was a torture method that even broke a man who planned to blow up the royal family. Welcome to the fortress. Today we look at the torture method of the Tower of London, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Little Ease was an oubliette style dungeon found inside specifically the White Tower, inside the oldest central part of the Tower of London. This specific castle keep was built during the Norman conquest, following William the Conqueror's victory at the Battle of Hastings. But Little Ease was a tiny dungeon in which a prisoner was locked and shut inside of the cell. Because it was so small, someone could not stand or sit, and the prisoner was forced to crouch for a significant amount of time, for even weeks on end. The prisoners subjected to this were often tortured in other ways inside of the tower, using harrowing devices such as a rack and a stretching device that was very dangerous. Also, the prisoners would then be manacled or subjected to the scavenger's daughter before they went into Little Ease. Specifically, Little Ease was a windowless cell which measured just around 4 square feet, and it was very cramped. It was a small dark space where hardly any air would get in or light, and the prisoner could hear the torture of others in other dungeons of the White Tower. It was psychological torture being locked in the dark for long periods of time, and the prisoner had to contend with their injuries also. Torture was not as often used throughout the Tudor period as many believe, and there were only a handful of amounts of time that it was in the tower used. It was a desperate situation, as information needed to be extracted, and that's why torture was allowed to happen. Little Ease was considered the most serious of torture methods, and it could be seen as a last resort, and the prisoners who would not be broken were locked inside the oubliette dungeon. During the reign of King Henry VIII, 2 prisoners, one a woman, was accused of stealing a huge amount of gold and money from the king. Alice Tankerville, the woman, was said to have seduced a guard of the Tower of London, who was meant to keep her locked up, and together the guard and prisoner planned an escape attempt. They also managed to get out of the Tower of London. They made their way past the gatehouse, but they were then captured by the Night's Watch. Alice Tankerville, alongside her husband, was hanged at the low water mark in the River Thames, and over hours she had to contend with her impending execution and death. However, John Board, the guard, was seen as bringing shame upon the royal bodyguard, and he was tortured brutally. He was placed on the rack and was beaten very badly, but also he was thrown inside of Little Ease for his treatment before he was hanged in chains, a broken man, from the walls of the Tower of London. There are a few other examples of prisoners being locked inside of Little Ease, and one record claims, on the 3rd of May 1555, Stephen Happs, for his lewd behaviour and obstinacy, committed this day to the Tower to remain in Little Ease for 2 or 3 days till he may be further examined. Another example occurred during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, as it was said, on the 10th of January 1591, Richard Topcliffe is set to take part in an examination in the Tower of George Beasley, seminary priest, and Robert Humberson, his companion. And if you shall see good cause by their obstinate refusal to declare the truth of such things as shall be laid to their charge in her Majesty's behalf, then shall you by authority hereof commit them to the prison called Little Ease, or to such other ordinary place of punishment as hath been accustomed to be used in these cases, and to certify proceedings from time to time. However, following the end of the Tudor period and the accession of James I onto the throne, there was a lot of animosity towards a new Scottish king, who united the thrones of England and Scotland. Famously, the Gunpowder Plot was planned, and the most famous plotter of them all, Guy Fawkes, was during his torture ordeal sent to Little Ease. He was racked brutally before, and was then thrown inside of Little Ease, and the combination of the rack and the oubliette-style dungeon was enough to get Fawkes to confess his crimes. But after this, Little Ease was not used much more, as torture was also not really deployed. With regards to where it actually was, it may have been possibly in the White Tower, but also it may have been found inside the Flint Tower rather than the White Tower, or it may have just been a hole in a wall in some part of the tower which was covered up by a wooden hatch. But Little Ease was one of the most brutal torture dungeons in history. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.